40%. That is not just a number. That was the staggering share of the entire world supply of heroin, controlled by one single man sitting on a throne of poppies. 1 out of every 4 deaths by overdose on the streets of the United States of America was a direct result of his industrial-scale slaughter. We are talking about millions of lives shattered while one man in a jungle fortress watched his bank account swell into the hundreds of millions. The year was 1977. A letter arrived in Washington District of Columbia that sent a shiver of pure terror through the CIA and the halls of the White House. It was an ultimatum that sounded like a death sentence for a generation. The message was simple and cold. Pay me $100 million, or I will drown your cities in a flood of white fire. I will turn your children into walking ghosts and your suburbs into open graveyards. The man behind this threat was Khun Sa. He was the undisputed king of the Golden Triangle. He was a warlord with 20,000 soldiers and a private arsenal of surface-to-air missiles, hidden in the deep jungle. While the world screamed in agony, he sat in his mountain palace, laughing at the most elite intelligence agencies on the planet. He was not just a drug dealer. He was a head of state in a country built on the corpses of addicts. But the most chilling part of the secret files is the betrayal at the core of his origin. Khun Sa was not a freak accident of nature. He was a monster meticulously crafted and fed by the CIA. The very men tasked with protecting the nation were the ones who taught this jungle orphan the art of war. They taught him how to lead and how to build a shadow empire that would eventually return to poison the veins of the very country that created him. This was the ultimate blowback. A jagged piece of shrapnel from a secret war that struck at the heart of the world. Tonight we peel back the skin of a man who was deemed completely untouchable. We will show you how he outmaneuvered the CIA and the DEA for 5 decades. Why did he die in luxury while the world wanted him in chains? How did he survive a $2 million bounty without ever spending a single day in a prison cell? Open the dossier. Step into the shadows. Because in the Golden Triangle, the truth is far more lethal than the poison he sold. To understand the monster, you must first look at the laboratory where he was born. The year was 1950. The setting was the lawless highlands of the Golden Triangle. A place where map lines mean nothing and raw power is the only currency. At that time, the jungle was crawling with the remnants of the Chinese Nationalist Army. These were soldiers who had fled the Communist Revolution with nothing but their rifles and a burning hatred. They had a secret benefactor that the world was never supposed to know about. The CIA. Washington wanted these guerrillas to harass the new regime in China. They sent them crates of unmarked weapons, bars of gold, and military advisors, who were masters in the black arts of unconventional warfare. Standing in the shadows of these secret training camps was a young man with cold, unblinking eyes. His name was Cheng Kai-fu, but the world would soon learn to fear him as Khun Sa. While other boys were struggling to find food, Khun Sa was a silent ghost, watching and learning from the best instructors the United States had to offer. He was not interested in their politics. He was interested in their mechanics. He memorized how to strip an American rifle in total darkness. He studied how the CIA officers organized complex supply lines through impenetrable terrain. He watched how they used terror to maintain discipline, and how they turned a hidden valley into an impregnable fortress. But the most lethal lesson Khun Sa learned was not how to kill. It was how to turn violence into a business. He saw with crystal clarity that the same mountain trails used to hide soldiers could be used to hide the most lucrative crop on earth. Opium. The sap of the poppy was more valuable than gold. And in a land where the law did not exist, whoever controlled the sap controlled the world. By his early 20s, Khun Sa was no longer a student. He was a visionary of the dark. He began recruiting the hungry and the broken, offering them a choice between starvation and the bloody glory of his shadow army. He moved with a terrifying efficiency that shocked even the men who had trained him. He realized that the CIA had given him a hammer, and he was going to use it to smash the world into a shape that suited him. In the year 1963, Khun Sa made a move of pure evil. He volunteered his private militia to help the Burmese military hunt down rebels. In exchange, he demanded a license that would change history. Immunity. The government gave him official protection to traffic as much opium as his mules could carry. They thought they were using a bandit to catch a rebel. In reality, they had just given a future emperor his first official license to slaughter. Within 2 years, his army was better equipped than the government forces. He bought black market mortars and machine guns by the truckload. When he walked through a mountain village, the silence was deafening. The people looked at him as a dark god. A bandit prince born from the ashes of a secret war. As he looked out over the vast sea of poppies, Khun Sa knew his education was complete. He had surpassed his masters. And he was ready to show the world just how much blood his empire could produce. Every empire has a moment where it seems destined for the dirt. For Khun Sa, that moment arrived in the year 1969. The Burmese military, realizing they had created a monster they could no longer chain, decided to cut the head off the snake. They lured him to a routine meeting, but there were no handshakes waiting for him. Only steel and betrayal. Khun Sa was shackled, thrown into a plane, and vanished into the stone silence of Mandalay prison. The world breathed a sigh of relief. The United States and the DEA believed the king of the Golden Triangle was finished. They thought 5 years in a concrete box would break his spirit and turn his army into dust. They were wrong. They forgot that you do not break a wolf by putting it in a cage. You only give it time to sharpen its teeth. Inside those damp walls, Khun Sa underwent a terrifying evolution. He did not waste away in despair. He turned his cell into a cathedral of strategy. He devoured books on military history and ancient philosophy, most notably The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He realized that raw violence was a tool for thugs, but psychological warfare was the weapon of emperors. He wrote down a principle that would guide every drop of blood he spilled for the next 30 years. In politics, there are no lifelong friends and no lifelong foes. There is only the acquisition and maintenance of power. While he sat in the dark, his most loyal lieutenants were busy executing a plan that would shock the international community. In the year 1973, they kidnapped 2 Soviet doctors working in a remote hospital. This was not about money. It was about leverage. They held a knife to the throat of Moscow and forced the Burmese government into an impossible corner. During the height of the Cold War, no one wanted a diplomatic disaster with the Soviet Union. In 1974, the gates of Mandalay prison swung open. Khun Sa walked out into the sunlight, not as a broken man, but as a resurrected god of the underworld. He immediately disappeared across the Thai border, vanishing into the green embrace of the jungle like a ghost. The government expected him to fade into obscurity. Instead, he did something brilliant and profoundly dangerous. He rebranded himself. He discarded his old identity and took the name Khun Sa, meaning the Prosperous Prince. He stopped calling himself a drug lord and started calling himself a freedom fighter. He wrapped his heroin empire in the flag of the Shan people, claiming every dollar of drug money was a contribution to their independence. It was a masterstroke of propaganda. He built schools, paved roads and funded clinics in villages. The government had forgotten. He turned the local population into his eyes and ears. By the year 1976, he had reconstituted his forces into the Shan United Army. He was no longer just a bandit hiding in the bushes. He was a head of state with his own territory, his own laws, and a personal guard ready to die for his smile. He had taken the lessons of his imprisonment and turned them into a shield of legitimacy. The resurrected prince was back, and he was about to make the world an offer that would bring a superpower to its knees. The Golden Triangle was no longer just a region. It was his kingdom. And the reign of white fire was about to begin. By the 1980s, Khun Sa was no longer just a man. He had become a global phenomenon of terror. He moved his base of operations deep into the Shan state to a fortress called Ho Mong. It was not a hideout. It was a sovereign nation carved out of the jungle. He built a city with its own electricity, satellite television, and a standing army of over 30,000 soldiers. These were not ragtag rebels. They were elite fighters armed with heavy machine guns, long-range artillery, and surface-to-air missiles, capable of swatting jet fighters out of the sky. But the real weapon of his empire was not found in the barracks. It was found in the laboratories. Khun Sa did something that no drug lord in history had ever dared to do. He industrialized death. He brought in master chemists from across Asia to refine raw opium into the most potent form of heroin ever seen on the planet. They called it number 4. It was 90% pure, Before Khun Sa, the heroin on American streets was cut and diluted until it was barely 5% pure. But his product was a chemical tidal wave that hit the veins of the Western world like a lightning bolt. The DEA and the CIA watched in absolute horror as the statistics began to climb. In the mid-1970s, Southeast Asian heroin accounted for only 5% of the American market. Under the reign of the Prosperous Prince, that number exploded to 80% in cities like New York. He was producing over 2,500 tons of opium annually. He was responsible for 4 out of every 10 heroin overdoses in the United States. He was killing more Americans every year than the Vietnam War, and he was doing it from a throne of gold thousands of miles away. The audacity of the man was chilling. In 1988, while President Ronald Reagan was declaring a total war on drugs, Khun Sa decided to declare war right back. He invited international journalists to his jungle palace and held a press conference that stunned the world. He sat there in his military uniform, smiling for the cameras, and repeated his infamous offer. "Pay me his $100 million, or the poison keeps flowing." He looked directly into the lens and mocked the DEA, calling them hypocrites. "Why not use a bandit to catch a bandit?" he asked with a smirk. The United States responded by putting a $2 million bounty on his head and filing a federal indictment in New York. They convinced the Thai military to launch a massive assault on his headquarters. Over 1,000 soldiers, backed by helicopter gunships and fighter jets, pounded his compound for 4 days. Buildings were leveled. Ammunition dumps exploded in balls of fire. The jungle floor was littered with the bodies of his soldiers. But when the smoke cleared, the prize was gone. Khun Sa had vanished hours before the final strike, moving through secret tunnels and hidden paths into the safety of the Burmese border. Within months, he had rebuilt everything. Bigger, stronger, and more fortified than before. He was the ghost that could not be caught. The emperor that could not be dethroned. The Golden Triangle was his fortress, and the blood of a generation was his prophet. The Industrial Revolution of death was at its peak, and the world was drowning in his white fire. No empire, no matter how blood-stained or fortified, lasts forever. By the early 1990s, the shadows were finally closing in on the Prosperous Prince. But the threat did not come from a CIA drone or a DEA raid. It came from a much older and more primal source. Betrayal from within and the shifting sands of global power. The Wa militia, a rival ethnic group known for their savage discipline in jungle combat, rose to challenge Khun Sa for the throne of the Golden Triangle. But they were not alone. They were backed by the same Burmese military junta that had once been on Khun Sa's payroll. The hunters had decided that their old partner was now a liability. At the same time, the United States launched Operation Tiger Trap. It was the most massive, multinational sting operation in the history of narcotics enforcement. They did not just go after his soldiers. They went after his lungs. They systematically dismantled his distribution networks across Bangkok, Singapore, and Hong Kong. His lieutenants were snatched off the streets in the dead of night. His bank accounts were frozen. His smuggling routes were sealed by a wall of international steel. For the first time in 30 years, Khun Sa was trapped. He was an aging wolf in a shrinking forest, surrounded by enemies who knew his every move. The world was prepared for a Scarface ending. The media expected a final, apocalyptic siege of his jungle headquarters at Ho Mong. They envisioned Khun Sa going down in a blaze of gunfire, surrounded by his mountain of white powder and his dying elite guards. A criminal end for a criminal king, but Khun Sa was a student of the art of war until his final breath. He knew that a dead martyr is useless, but a wealthy survivor is a winner. On January 5, 1996, the world received news that defied all common sense. Khun Sa had not been captured. He had not been killed, he had surrendered. But not to the Americans who had a $2 million bounty on his head. He surrendered to the Burmese government. In a move of staggering cynicism, he negotiated his own retirement. He traded his entire army, his territory, and his weapons for a golden parachute. The terms of the deal were an insult to every victim of his poison. He was granted total immunity. Burma refused to extradite him to the United States, citing a lack of treaties and a sudden sense of national sovereignty. Khun Sa moved into a massive, luxurious villa in the capital city of Yangon. He traded his military uniform for expensive silk suits, He spent his final years as a legitimate businessman, investing his drug millions into real estate, transportation, and ruby mines, while the DEA filed useless protests, and the families of addicts wept in American suburbs. The man responsible for their pain was sipping tea in a lush garden, protected by the very generals who were supposed to be his keepers. He died in 2007, not in a prison cell, but in a soft bed surrounded by his wealth. He never faced a judge. He never apologized. He simply slipped away into the darkness of history, taking the secrets of his CIA ties to the grave. His life was a chilling testament to a simple, brutal truth. If you kill one man, you are a murderer. If you kill a million, you are a king. And if you know the right secrets, you can get away with it all. The files on Khun Sa are closed, but the white fire he ignited still burns across the world. The monster is gone, but the system that created him is still waiting for its next student. The case of Khun Sa is not just a story about a drug lord who got away with it. It is a chilling mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of global power. It reminds us that behind every shadow empire, there is often a hidden hand holding the curtain. The white fire of the Golden Triangle did not die with the Prosperous Prince. It only changed its shape, finding new kings and new laboratories in the silence of the mountains. But the question remains: how deep does the relationship between international intelligence and the narcotics trade truly go? If you want to dive deeper into the hidden files of the CIA and their secret history with global traffickers, our next investigation is already waiting for you. If this story made you question what you thought you knew about justice, then you belong here with us. Join the investigation by hitting that subscribe button and turning on the notification bell. Every sub helps us keep the dossier open and the truth faceless. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the final deal of Khun Sa. This is Secret Files. Stay vigilant, because in this world, the most dangerous secrets have no face.